Bonhams has had a long history in the Middle Eastern art market, and this April we held our first dedicated sale of modern and contemporary Middle Eastern art in London. And building on the success of that sale, which saw nearly 90% of lots sold by value, it's my pleasure to introduce you to some of the truly standout works that we have on offer at our second sale of this year in October in London. We start with the cover lot of the auction, which is Farhad Moshiri's You Left But Not From My Heart, or in Persian, Rafti Vali Na Az Del. Farhad Moshiri is perhaps the most recognized and well-established of the contemporary artists emerging from the Middle East over the past decade. And in the present work, we have possibly one of the most magnificent examples of his inimitable jar series. In this series, Moshiri depicts jars that are inspired by ancient Persian pottery. However, they're depicted in a state of decay, fragmented and aged. The reason they're depicted in a state of decay is demonstrative or representative for Moshiri of the state of decay of the culture which has given rise to them. And over these jars, he writes popular Persian song lyrics. These are banal phrases taken from contemporary Iranian music. And really what Moshiri wants to reinforce is the idea of this grand Iranian culture having surrendered to the trivial. Estimated at 40 to 60,000 pounds, this is one of the rarest works from the series in that it depicts two jars on one canvas. We're also extremely privileged to be able to offer two masterpieces of Iranian modernism from the collection of Dr. Ehsan Yaşartı, who is possibly the most acclaimed and distinguished figure in Iranian academia. As the head of Columbia's Center for Iranian Studies for almost 50 years, Ehsan Yaşartı has embarked on perhaps one of the most ambitious academic projects in Middle Eastern studies, which is the Encyclopedia Iranica. And the works sold at this present auction, proceeds of which will be going towards the Iranica project. The first of these works is from perhaps one of the fathers of Iranian modernism, Sohrab Sepehri. Now, to Iranians, he requires no introduction, a poet, a philosopher, an artist, and an intellectual. Sepehri was really motivated by two great artistic impulses. One, which was his love of abstraction and of the Eastern painting techniques that he had come into contact with during his travels in Japan and China. And secondly, his love of native Kashan, which was the village of his birth. In this work, Hanging Clothes, which is estimated at 70 to 100,000 pounds, we see the perfect balance of Sepehri's two artistic impulses. In the Arab category, we're extremely privileged to be offering a seminal work by Jawad Salim. The present work, titled Salome, is perhaps one of Salim's earliest works, and certainly the earliest to come to auction. Depicting the famed biblical temptress, Salome was painted in 1938 when Salim was in his late teens. He was extremely lucky to gain a scholarship from the Iraqi government to go and study abroad, and in fact had a stint at Slade in London as well in the 1940s. He was always concerned with thespian, musical and dramatic themes, and often painted portraits of performers and musicians. And for him, what was really interesting was the contrast between the persona and the character depicting it. And what we see in Salome is exactly this. We see an extremely pensive, introverted portrait of what was usually considered quite a provocative and erotic subject matter. Depicted when he was only 19, this is perhaps one of the seminal works in understanding Salim's later artistic progression. This monumental work is the largest work on canvas to come to auction by the Lebanese artist Ayman Balbaki. Balbaki's work is primarily concerned with themes of conflict, and interestingly, he approaches the theme of conflict, and specifically the damage done to his native Beirut during its 2006 conflict with Israel. He approaches it from an architectural perspective, and in some ways, Balbaki considers the damage done to buildings and the architectural deterioration of the urban setting after conflict to almost be indicative of a deeper wound, a wound in the identity of a given place. The present building, which is the Armonial building in Beirut, is part of Balbaki's series which documents the buildings that were destroyed by the 2006 conflict with Israel. Although he does depict buildings in a state of destruction, there is always an element of optimism in Balbaki's work. And we see a very imposing scaffolding, which for him represents the regenerative instinct and the resilience that often follows periods of destruction.